Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Lots to cover in this week's video. We're going to talk about Canada's latest inflation data and what that means for the Bank of Canada. We're going to talk about a policy change here in BC, and then I'm also going to give you a feet on the street perspective of what's happening with the market right now. Real quick before we get started, if this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hassan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area, and I make educational real estate content to help you on your real estate journey. When I'm not making videos like this, I'm helping people just like you buy and sell real estate across the Lower Mainland. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to chat with me one-on-one, you can book me for a free call in the Calendly link below or on screen, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. All right, hope you had a great week. We're going to jump right into it. Canada's latest inflation data, not great news for the Bank of Canada, not great news for our pocketbooks and our wallets. Inflation, CPI inflation came in at 2.6%, where economists were expecting 2.2%. It was an increase over last month, which was at 1.9%. So in essence, it went up and it wasn't expected to go up as significantly. The reason why there was some expectation for it to bump upwards was midway through the month, midway through February is when the GST holiday ended. So there was some expectation with that ending that inflation would move upwards. But not necessarily to that degree. And now it puts the Bank of Canada in a very challenging position for their next rate decision, which is next month, because their whole goal is to keep inflation around that 2% number, but they're also dealing with a current scenario that is very unpredictable with what's happening in the US, and specifically US-Canada relations, trade wars. Every day it seems we're getting a bit of a different story from the US and what those potential impacts may be here in Canada. So, as it stands right now, and keeping in mind, there is more data to come out, including the next jobs report, and again, finding out what's happening with the tariffs before the bank has to make the decision. But keeping all of that in mind, most major banks now are saying very likely to be a pause on rates in April, that the bank is in a very difficult position to be able to keep cutting rates and even to make the right decision, because again, we're kind of in a reactive scenario, and being reactive and not necessarily having a future plan with the rates or knowing which direction they're going to go. Challenging scenario for everyone. So that wasn't the best set of news to hear on inflation. If we were to only stand alone on that data, we'd be looking at a rate pause in April. Still up in the air what's going to happen. I did just mention, obviously, with the tariffs on steel and aluminum right now, a potential, what I'm hearing now, a global tariff coming into play, I think July or August. Lots of uncertainty in the market. One thing that I was reading on Twitter. I follow a gentleman, his name is Ron Butler. If you know him, Ron, the mortgage guy, follow him on Twitter. Extremely knowledgeable, extremely animated as well, really entertaining to read his stuff. But he was mentioning how, at least one of the major banks is now being more restrictive on applications that are coming through for folks that are in the steel and aluminum industry. And so, it just kind of opens your eyes in terms of what a ripple effect might be, or what a trickle down effect might be of these tariffs, even if it doesn't cost certain people their job. They're going to be viewed a little bit differently, it sounds like, by the major banks when it comes to getting mortgages. And so you can see how this ripple effect might be. If I can circle to, what's actually happening in the market today. I'm recording this video. It's, I think, March 19th or March 20th today. As it stands, if we continue this same trend as we move forward through the rest of the month, we are going to be significantly lower sales-wise than we were last year. Now, I will say I do feel a little bit of a pickup in the market over the last week since I recorded the last video. Definitely a lot more inquiries, a lot more of balanced interactions, I would say, between sellers and buyers. One of the things that people sometimes forget about is that a lot of sellers have planned all along to be putting their properties on the market in spring. And so we're, right heading into that time. And the thing about sellers is that they're not really concerned about what's happening with the tariff situation. That's not guiding their decision making. On the buyer side, it definitely is the uncertainty and the headlines. For sellers, a lot of them, they're just enacting plans they already had. And buyers are, over the last week, I think they're waiting back in. They're waiting into this spring market. They're not all jumping in at once. Very often, spring market would have started in middle of February. Middle to end of February is when it's a busy market. You kind of have the spring doors opening, if you will, earlier in February. And now it's lukewarm, and I think buyers are just, a lot of them are now starting to wade into it. Funny enough, we haven't had a lot of tariff headlines in the last week, and it goes to show you just how much of our action and our inaction and how we feel and how we act is based on the headlines that we read. And understandably enough, it's when it's always coming in your face, it's going to dictate, how you might move forward. But, the crux of it all is you kind of have this balanced situation where as many sellers are reaching out and putting their properties on market as buyers are entering in some spaces, in some segments. There's much more sellers. We've talked so many times on my channel about that condo market, how it is a different breed than when we look at, for example, a detached market where we continue to see quality supply, less and less of it on the market as time goes on. We can't say the same about condos. In fact, I would say you're getting, higher end condos at, much better prices nowadays, strictly due to the competition. But again, barring something unforeseen, we're going to be down year over year. I think we're going to have we're going to have a stronger second half of March for sure than what we saw in the first half of March. But everyone's kind of leaning on the tariff talk, what's happening, and now again we're hearing that a major bank is looking at certain applications restrictively based on the sector you're in. So it's a really interesting time. I would say that overall, people, not necessarily on the real estate market, but I would say overall people are pessimistic about just today, what's happening today. If we talk about the political side of the spectrum, as I understand it, we may now have an election, a federal election at the end of April or May. And generally speaking, housing is always kind of that number one hot button topic whenever there's anything political. But when there's talks of an election here provincially, when we had the election, housing has always been number one up until January, February. And now housing is very likely to fall completely on the back burner. That's neither of the platforms that's going to be run on. You have a very divisive, I would say, population out there. Again, met with a lot of pessimism, and the reality is the best times to buy real estate, if you look back, is when everyone was pessimistic, right? When people are optimistic. Optimism is expensive for buyers, right? When people are very hungry and they're feeling great and they're out there, they're shopping, and you're going to an open house, there's 50 people, there's a lineup out the door, that ends up costing you money. When there's pessimism in the market, things are obviously more inexpensive. I think we're gonna still see that on the condo front, at least in the short term. But I've said on this channel, over the next 4 years, 5 years, when we see the effect of what's not getting built today in pre-sale, because make no bones about it, sales are down. I did a video last week talking about the pre-sale crisis. Today's pre-sale sales are what in effect bring housing to the market in 3 to 5 years. So at that point, we're going to be in a pretty tough spot. I also look at it in terms of, how is our labor market going to shift during this time where, the potential tariffs and costs are going up and less people are getting into trades. We have less and less construction workers. You have Canada shipping in construction workers as we speak to try and meet some of the demand. And truthfully, the demand probably not there over the next, 1 to 2 years. But when it amps back up and we don't have the younger folks taking up trades, what does that tell you about the cost of trades? And so everything that I see is that the input costs into real estate are only going to go up. The materials themselves, the labor themselves, the land itself, it's all going to go up. And so I can't see a future where real estate prices come down necessarily. What might end up happening is, if the margins become too slim for these developers, many will have to back away. You'll probably find a lot of the large developers controlling all of the projects, and you're going to find some of these middle developers that the margins are just not there for them to take on the risk. And as they drop off, it cuts into supply as well, and that whole supply and demand balance, it starts to get into equilibrium again, and there'll just be less supply, but the input costs are going to be higher, and so that product cost at the end will be higher. But again, that's more of a long-term what's going to happen. I mentioned off of the top of the video, I wanted to talk about a policy change real quick. If you followed my channel for a couple of years, there was a program that the BC provincial government had launched, a pilot program for homeowners to build secondary suites in their home, and they would be able to obtain a forgivable loan of 50% of the cost to do it, up to a max of $40,000. To actually create the suite, provided that it was rented below market for 5 years. So this was a pilot project that was launched 2 years ago. Right away, I thought that I didn't think this was a great project at all. I think, especially in our province here where all of the policies seem to go against the landlord, this was kind of an interesting policy to kind of promote being a landlord when all of the rest of the policies were against it by the provincial government. And so ultimately, that pilot project has now been scrapped. It was supposed to run until 2027. It's scrapped. I think I read that there were 200 approved applications that went through under that pilot project, but it was scrapped based on a couple of things. Number one, of course, the economic certainty. They want to take that money and use it for whatever else they may need it for. I think they're going to put it towards their BC Builds initiative to start. And number two, nationally, federally, they are launching a similar type of secondary suite program with more funding available. But that's something that's now off the table, I think, as of March 31st. That's off the table. Just to touch very quickly, as we're talking about the province, Bill 7, I don't know if you have heard about this yet. Excuse me, I don't know if you've heard about this yet, but they're introducing a bill that's basically going to allow them to make any sort of legislative changes they like as it relates to the economy without actually going through the legislature. And I haven't dug too deeply into this Bill 7, but it basically would give the BC NDP authoritative rights to basically do as they please. So as you can imagine, it's being met with a lot of angst, a lot of pushback, especially from the BC Conservatives, to give that much power to one group. And where does that power limit itself? What we do know about the bill is that it would expire in 2027. So it, the optics of it is that it is definitely, tariff driven, but I'll have to dive deeper into it. So I have more details, but, keep that in mind. If you're want to research something, look up Bill 7 and take a look at it and how it might affect you, because that looks like it's coming into play. The Greens are supporting it, but it's going to be interesting. Anytime, you guys know this about me, I'm not big on one group having so much power, and anytime you give that much power to a group, what's going to happen? I did a video, I think it was last year, talking about a Kitsilano supportive housing project that basically got shot down by the court system because the provincial government tried to just push it through and they didn't go through the right channels. And in fact, the Kitsilano Coalition took it to court and it got shot down at the court level. Now, I'm not saying that Bill 7 would, that this sort of a supportive housing project would fall under Bill 7. Again, I have not done all of my homework on it, but it's interesting that happened Q4 of last year. Now, all of a sudden this year, we have this bill that's being tabled to give the provincial government more power. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, hit the like button. What that does is it takes the video and it sends it out to more people so they can also learn from it. And if you enjoy this weekly real estate content, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss next week's video. And lastly, again, if you are in Metro Vancouver or the Fraser Valley and you want to chat with me one-on-one, you can book me for a free call, or you can just give me a call, send me a text, shoot me an email, whatever's easiest for you. I'd love to chat with you, but I want to thank you so much for watching this week's video, and I look forward to seeing you next week.